All right. Welcome back for another week of special education law. This week is about the Individuals with Disabilities Act idea, and it is the guidelines that we follow right now today. Some of the chapter I noticed was still pretty heavy on the legalese, and some of it started breaking it down into more of the applicable part, the part that you'll need to know each day throughout your teaching career. So I'm just going to kind of take you through the presentation, not because I don't think you can read it, but because I'm going to add my own notes that will hopefully clear some things up for you. We had our early court cases in the 1970s. That started just asking for students to be allowed to attend school. Before that, there were giant group homes, institutions that kids could go to. And if you ever looked up the videos of them, it might break your heart. It's really sad how students or even adults with disabilities were treated at that time period in our history. And so they came up with first the Public Law 94-142, and then that was kind of reauthorized or re-identified in 1990 as IDEA. And the purpose of IDEA was just to make sure that students with disabilities were getting access to full educational opportunities. It had the procedural safeguards, so this is parental rights and what they could do if they felt that their students' needs were not being met, and then also the least restrictive environment for the students. Because it came as a federal statute or a federal law, it also came with federal funding. And so in the beginning, not all states adopted it. Most did because they wanted the money. New Mexico didn't. And then through a series of lawsuits, New Mexico did end up adopting it as well. So sometimes we might not think that we get the appropriate amount of money we need for different things, but the nice thing is when it's a federal law, if you're not following it, you lose your federal funding. And so that makes sure that more people will follow it. They just couldn't turn down the money. There are multiple categories of disabilities included in IDEA. We have autism, which was added in 1990, as well as traumatic brain injury added in 1990. But beyond that, we have deaf and blind, just deafness, hearing impaired, mental retardation, which I'll come back to, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairments, that's more like paralysis or lack of mobility of certain areas of your body. Other health impairments, that category is skyrocketing right now, which I'll come back to as well. Emotional disturbance or emotional impairment, as it's sometimes referred, specific learning disability, speech and language impaired, and then visually impaired, including blindness. Mental retardation. I know a lot of times when people hear the word retardation, it makes you cringe a little. Barack Obama did sign in 2010 that it would be called intellectual disabilities, but anytime we're studying laws of the past, it's still going to be referred to as retardation. Autism right now is one of the highest growing categories, as well as otherwise health impaired. I think because we just know more about it than we used to. There is a difference between autism in the educational world and autism in the medical world. And so sometimes parents think if they have a medical diagnosis of autism, then their student gets an IEP, but actually the school ruling is a little bit different. And then otherwise health impaired. So we have an influx of students maybe with attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They're able to qualify under that category as well as for some other health impairments. The structure of IDEA is broken down into 4 parts. Basically, the thing to know about the 4 parts is that parts like Part B, which are the educational provisions, is a permanent idea, whereas Parts C and D can be tweaked usually every 4 to 5 years. It's up for reauthorization to make sure it's still going to exist, and if so, what is it going to look like? So just to know that some of it is still undergoing changes, whereas other parts of it are more permanent adopted law. In IDEA, we do have to, as part of the general provisions and educational provisions, we provide services for kids ages 3 to 21. You can also have identification from birth to 3. It is not required that those students then receive services because it's not required that general education students receive services. At that time, it has been changed so that from 3 to 5, we do require services. And actually, Michigan can also provide services up to age 26, depending on the severity of the disability. Even though that is not the federally mandated, that's our state statute. So part of IDEA that is probably the most applicable to you, zero reject, which means regardless of their disability, we need to make sure we're following IDEA. Identification and evaluation. This sets the timelines for how a student is identified for special education services. This includes making sure that we're giving tests that are scientifically based, that we're giving the same tests throughout or same types of tests. And it also includes the timeline. Now, the book referred to the 60-day timeline a lot, where if a student is in initial testing, either by parent request or by school request, that you have 60 days. In the state of Michigan, that is not true. We have 30 days. If a parent submits a request in writing, we have 10 days to respond to that request, and then a total of 30 days in which to complete the testing or evaluation and hold the IEP team meeting. So even though the book referred to 60, if you're currently teaching in Michigan or planning to teach in Michigan, know that that is actually 30 days. It also includes free and appropriate public education and least restrictive environment. I would say right now, the majority of the cases for law fall between those because appropriate can be construed in many different ways. What looks appropriate here? What looks appropriate here? And so that's open for a lot more discussion. And then least restrictive environment also has a lot of concerns or a lot of different interpretations in the fact that if the student can function in this classroom, is it still really the best placement for them? And so that opens up for interpretation quite a bit. Just know that you will probably hear of court cases or have some concerns with FAPE and least restrictive environment throughout your career. I have never had a parent question the least restrictive environment, but we've had many discussions about what is the appropriate placement and just explaining the whole continuum of services from most restrictive to least and where we need to start in that process and why. And I found that for the most part, if you are just open and honest with parents and tell them, this is why I think this is some data to back it up. If we try it, it doesn't work, we'll stay in communication, we'll make sure that your child is successful. Most of the time, parents respond really well to that. The more you communicate, the less likely they are to be upset, even if something. I don't tell you that to scare you, but just know that that is something you'll want to stay current on and just have good communication. It's just good practice anyway, but it really does help smooth things over if there's any questions or concerns. The next part of IDEA Part B is the procedural safeguards. And I only laugh when I say that because I have to give them out. You will have to give them out at every IEP, or at least offer them to parents at every single IEP. And they're about 80 pages long, and it's very legalese. And so a lot of times it can be a little overwhelming for parents, which is why I like to have little cheat codes like if this, then this, or here's a copy of the timeline that I give to parents just to kind of help them interpret the law. But one major thing about procedural safeguards, or two actually, one, it kind of defines the different disability categories and how students would qualify in them, which is helpful to parents. And then two, it shows them what to do, the steps to take if they don't agree with something or if they're concerned about something. And then IDEA also talks about parental participation and parent input. And actually, this was amended or modified quite a bit in 1997 with the second reauthorization of IDEA. So we will talk about it more then. All right, so that is the end of part one of the videos. And now I will make another one. This chapter was a little bit longer.